today I have a quick and easy crochet beanie tutorial for you, and this beanie is actually shockingly simple to complete. And for our beanie, I am working with some size 4 medium weight wool yarn, and this is by the Cascade yarns. I'm also going to be using a size G or 4 1/4 millimeter crochet hook. And you will need a stitch marker of some sort for this, so you can use a stitch marker, safety pin, or scrap piece of yarn. And we're going to begin with a magic circle, so take your tail and drape it over your working yarn, and you're going to pinch that intersection. From here, we're going to yarn over and pull up through our loop, and then separate our loop out like this. Next, we're going to chain 1, and then we want to place 12 double crochets inside of our magic circle. And it's important to remember when you're working in your magic circle to work in the loop as well as over your tail. And once you have your 12 double crochets in place, then you're going to pull on your tail to tighten the gap in your magic circle. From here, we're going to be working in between our double crochet stitches, so right here between the stems that form our double crochet, rather than the top of the stitch. So we want to skip our chain 1 and our first 2 double crochets of our row, and diving right into the gap between our second and our third double crochet, we're going to place 4 double crochets. But we want to make sure that we mark the first stitch of these 4 to mark our new row. So I usually place 2 stitches and then mark the first one. And again, that was 4 double crochets between your second and your third double crochet stitch. And we didn't join at the end of our last row, so you can see that we're starting to form a spiral. From here, we're going to skip our next 2 double crochets and then place 4 double crochets between our second and our third stitch again. And I'm just working in that gap between them. And that's going to be our pattern going all the way around our row, skipping 2 stitches and then placing 4 double crochets between that second and third stitch. So when you get to the end of your row, you should have a total of 24 double crochets. And when you get to the end of your row, you're going to skip these last 2 double crochets, and you're going to place 4 double crochets right here in that joining gap, right beside your stitch marker. And we can go ahead and remove our stitch marker. And the pattern for our next row is still going to be to skip 2 double crochets, but we want to place 3 double crochets between them rather than 4. And we always want to make sure we're marking that first stitch of our row. So go ahead and repeat this pattern going all the way around your row, skipping 2 double crochets and then placing 3. And when you get to the end of your row, you should have a total of 36 double crochets. And just like our last row, our last set of 3 double crochets are going to go in this last little gap here right before our stitch marker. And we can remove our stitch marker. And the pattern for our next row is to skip our clump of 3 double crochets and then place 4 double crochets in that gap between our sets of 3 double crochets. So we're basically just placing 4 double crochets in each of these big gaps here. And of course, you want to make sure that you mark the first stitch of your row. And when you get to the end of this row, you should have a total of 48 double crochets. And don't forget to work in your last gap here, and you can remove your stitch marker. The pattern for our next row is to skip 2 double crochets and then place 3 double crochets in the gap between our second and third stitch. So go ahead and repeat that pattern, skipping 2 and placing 3, going all the way around your row. And when you get done, you should have a total of 60 double crochets. And at the end of your row, you can remove your stitch marker. And the pattern for this last row of increasing is to skip our clump of 3 double crochets and then place 4 double crochets in those gaps. And we're going to repeat this going around our row for a total of 72 double crochets. And at the end of your row, you can remove your stitch marker. So the pattern from here is to skip these clumps of 4 double crochets and then place 4 double crochets in each of these gaps. And we are actually going to be following this pattern for the next 11 rows. And you might find it helpful to mark the first stitch of this first row of this new pattern so that you can easily count your rows. And after placing your 11 rows, your beanie should look something like this. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this stitch marker, and we're going to place one row where in these gaps between our clumps of 4, we're going to place 3 double crochets. And this will bring the slouchy beanie down to fit better around an average size head. And if you're making this for someone with a larger head, then you can continue that same pattern that we were working for one more row. And when you get to the end of your row, you should have a total of 60 double crochets. And when you get to the end of this row, you can go ahead and remove that stitch marker. And from here, we will no longer be working in the gaps between our stitches, but instead we're going to work in the top portion of our stitch, just like you would traditionally do. And all we're going to do is place 1 single crochet in each stitch in each of our rows for the next 7 rows. And you might find it helpful to mark this first single crochet stitch of this first row, just like we did before. So go ahead and repeat this for the next 7 rows, and I will meet back up with you there. And at the end of these 7 rows, your beanie should look something like this. To finish off our beanie, what we're going to do is place 1 slip stitch in our next 3 stitches. And this will taper off our spiral, like that. And then we're going to cut and tie off our yarn. And I like to weave my tail in the direction that I was crocheting for a few stitches and then hide it up the inside of my beanie. And once you're done hiding your tail, then this seam should be pretty difficult to see. And hold on to this excess yarn because I am currently working on a scrap yarn beanie, and once it's complete, I will link to it in the description. If you end up making this beanie, please let me know in the comments below how it turned out, and if you're making this for another person, I always love to hear about that. Thank you so much for working with me, and I hope you have a wonderful, awesome day.